Archiving started. Okay, welcome all. I hope you enjoyed that chapter on ideology and you spent a lot of time thinking about that. It's kind of a topic that I think a lot of Americans need to understand better. We're moving on now. We're on 6 now. In the book, it's entitled Public Opinion and Political Participation, but I like to kind of boil it down into a topic I think of as who votes. And so we're going to cover all the themes in Chapter 6 in this lecture, which is who votes. So let me go ahead and Chapter 6. That's right. That's what we're looking at. So first of all, about what is participation. And when we think about what political participation is, the number one thing you should think is that it is a linkage institution. What that means is it's one of those things that links the people to the government. So this is the government, and then here are the people. In this chapter, we're going to start talking about the things that the people can do to communicate what we want to the government. Okay? And so, for example, voting. Great example of a linkage institution. Even learning about politics. That's something that we have to do in order to make informed choices. So participation can be anything like going to a rally or even making a campaign donation. So these are the kinds of things that we mean. The things that we do to politically participate, connecting the people and what we want with the government and what it does. Okay, so some examples. I've already given you a couple here on this slide, but some other examples of what some of these participation modes are. Showing your support for a candidate by doing something like carving pumpkins. A lot of the presidential elections, they always happen in November, so there's a lot of things right around Halloween. Here's another example. This is Sarah Palin, I think. Yeah, Sarah Palin family in a pumpkin patch. She's having a campaign event. Attending an event like this, hearing a campaign or a candidate speaking is a great example of a way to participate in politics. Slides are coming up slow here. Here's a picture of President Obama when he was campaigning for president back in 2008, speaking to a giant crowd. So attending a rally like this where you hear a candidate speak and come to understand their ideas. Even reading the newspaper, that's something critical to participation. On the discussion board, we've talked about whether people should vote or not, and of course, people always say yes, everyone should vote, but then do we really want people out there voting if they don't know anything? So informing yourself and preparing to vote is even more important than the act of voting itself. And then, of course, voting, very critical to a democracy. How can it even exist as a democracy if the people didn't tell the government what we wanted? So it just couldn't work. So people have to be voters. Let me say something about voting, and that kind of helped me put this lecture together. And it's kind of a complicated idea, but I want to explain it to you. Voting is a democratic imperative. If something is imperative, another synonym for imperative would be necessary. Now, how could we have a democracy if we didn't have voting? So voting is necessary, but how we vote is a social construction. What do I mean by social construction? I mean, we as Americans have created laws that shape who can vote and under what circumstances. And some seem very obvious. For example, you don't let a 5-year-old child vote. Well, that's a decision that we as a society have made, that you can't vote unless you're the proper age. But think about how the age changed, because when the country was established, the age was 21, then it was 18. Like, there's nothing magic about these rules, 18, 21, but we as a society have decided who can vote and under what circumstances. So voting is imperative, but who can vote and how they vote is something we have decided on as a society. In the United States, the typical voter is the typical politician. This is a picture of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and I would assert to you that if we look at who is in Congress today, it doesn't look a whole lot different from this picture. For example, last week the U.S. House of Representatives was debating whether or not insurance companies should should cover contraceptive devices for women. And you might have heard that there was not one woman called to testify about that. So in a sense, we haven't changed that much as a society. So in the history of America, the people who have been allowed to participate has changed a lot. This is a list of all the restrictions that have been placed on people over the time. 1, you had to own land, you had to be landed. 2, you had to be white. 3, you had to be free, meaning not a slave. You had to be male, majority age, which I said already has changed. Indian, meaning not Native American. Native Americans didn't get the right to vote in federal elections until 1924. Can you imagine? 1924. Non-Mexican, non-Asian, you had to be Christian, literate, and non-speaking. Like, these are all the different restrictions. These are all the different social constructions that we as Americans have placed on who we will allow to participate in our voting populace. And another, to take it even further, as you could argue, the rules of the game still benefit the game's original players, meaning the people who have originally started making rules in America, they're still basically the same kind of people are making these rules, and they still continue to benefit the elite. So it's sort of an argument based on elite. The elites made the rules, and the rules benefit the elites in the beginning. Today, the elites still make the rules, and the elites are still benefited by what's going on in politics. And as we looked at in the chapter on Congress, we still have a clear majority of very wealthy people that are in the House and Senate. In fact, I saw on Time Magazine, I guess it was last week, almost every president we've had has been a millionaire. There have been a couple who haven't had a lot of wealth, like Harry Truman, for example, but most of them have been awfully wealthy. So most of the policy in America is still made by elites for elites. Of course, to every rule, there's an exception. I want to tell you about a woman named Patty Murray, and she was a senator. She was elected in the state of Washington, and she still represents Washington in the U.S. Senate. But she was a pretty non-political person. She was a single mom, and she had kids in a stroller, and she was relying upon a state-funded daycare program in the state of Washington. And so they were going to cut that program, and she went down to the state capitol, and she said, look, this is super important to me. I need this daycare plan. I can't cut it. It'll harm me and my children. And the guy said, well, yeah, too bad for you. That's ridiculous. And she said, oh, I'm so mad at you. You're not listening to me. I'm going to run for your seat. And he said, oh, who cares? You're just a mom in tennis shoes. So this mom in tennis shoes was so mad, she ran and she beat him. And she continued to run, and then in 1992, she was elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Washington. So she's an example who looked at the way things were, didn't like it, and worked to change it. So even though the rules of the game still benefit the game's original players, there are still people trying to work to change that. And this is just a little something interesting I've noticed. When we talk about politics, when people run for office, they campaign. Well, where did they get that language? Well, a campaign is the language of war. When we talk about who's ahead, they talk about it being a horse race. People are neck and neck. And also lots of metaphors about football. I remember listening to Rachel Maddow during the 2008 election talking about which candidate was ahead, et cetera. And she was saying, oh, McCain's really playing defense right now, and Obama's really playing offense right now. And I was thinking about my mom, because my mom was the kind of person who, even though my dad was a football coach, she could never remember the difference between offense and defense. Like, she could, like, you'd tell her 100 times, pass the ball, she just couldn't remember that. So when we talk about politics in a way that only certain people really relate to, just think about that. We're kind of excluding other people from that discussion. So maybe just once we should talk about politics with a metaphor that women would relate to more, like sewing a quilt. Like, all hands of America are coming together to sew this quilt. Yeah, I really like that idea. Okay, I want to talk about suffrage. And I'm sure that this is a term you've heard before. I want you to know, though, that the word suffrage means two things. First, it means the right to vote, but it also means the right to run for office. So full suffrage means that you have the right to vote and run for office. And then, like, for example, in America, there were a lot of years when women could not vote, but they could run for office. So here and there, you'd see examples of women who had been elected to office by men. Or the opposite could also be true. Women might have had the right to vote, but not the right to run for every office. Okay, so expansion of suffrage has kind of moved forward slowly, piece by piece. You should know that the federal government has control over who votes in federal elections, and then states control who votes in state elections. But when it comes to the idea of owning property, as soon as the United States came into being, basically, the requirement that certain people own property started to fall away. So states gave this up at different points, but as early as independence, some states did not require people to own property. So that one be landed fell away as a requirement early as 1776, and now it's completely gone in all parts of the country. Okay, the next requirement that really changed, this is a picture of Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. And this was signed during the Civil War, and it freed the slaves. Now, slaves didn't actually get the right to vote in federal elections until the amendment, which was ratified in 1865. That's when black men got the right to vote. Now, yeah, it's important you remember it's black men because, remember, women didn't have the right to vote, so it was only the male freed slaves that got the right to vote at this point. Okay, so now the people without land and property can vote, and now black men can vote. The next change that came along was, let me just explain a little bit. This is a picture of if you can see it up at the top, it says Reconstruction Congress, a reconstructed Constitution of the state of Louisiana. And after the 15th Amendment was ratified, from about 1865 to 1876 is a period in the South of Reconstruction. And during Reconstruction, the North had a big role in saying how things were, and one of the things they put a priority on was making sure that the blacks could vote. So if you look at the pictures of the men who are in the Louisiana State Assembly here, you can see that it's majority black. So during this period of time, there was a huge renaissance of blacks in the United States. So it really ended in about 1876 when a lot of things happened, but basically Jim Crow laws, which I will talk about in a little bit, started to kick in and blacks were excluded from voting. So the period between 1865 and 1876, blacks voted in great number. You saw lots of state legislatures that looked like this with blacks highly represented in the government, but after Jim Crow kicked in, then you saw very little black political participation. Okay, so the next thing that happened is women get the right to vote, and women get the right to vote in 1920 because women had worked really hard for the end of slavery and the freedom of black slaves in America, but then they realized later, well, we don't have the right to vote. So they started working in turn for women's suffrage. And so you probably heard the term suffragette. And suffragettes were women who marched and fought for the right to vote. And they were at it for from 1880 to 1920 when they finally earned the right to vote. So it was a pretty tumultuous time. It's pretty funny because male politicians were super worried that when women got the right to vote, everything would change. But in fact, when women were given that right to vote, they tended to not run out and vote right away. They'd never been told they should before, and so they didn't really want to. So it's pretty funny. It took a long time for women to start participating at the same rate as men. So this is a woman, we saw a picture of her during the Congress unit, Alice Mary Robertson, and she, until Mary Fallon, was the only woman to represent Oklahoma in Congress. So she was an anti-suffragist. She did not believe women had the right to vote, And I just picture the men of Oklahoma going, she's our kind of woman. Let's vote her in. So she goes in. She's in there for one term, and then she resigned. So she was super. Okay, and one other thing I want to show you, and this illustrates the difference between the right to vote and the right to office. A friend of mine who's a political scientist at Oklahoma State, he did this research, and you can see the trend line here. This is 1900, 1920, 1940, and then it goes all the way up into the future. Women in Oklahoma didn't have full suffrage, meaning didn't have the right to hold every state office until 19. So whereas most other states got the right to vote here in 1920, right to vote and the right to hold all statewide offices. In Oklahoma, you saw this little uptick in participation, but it wasn't until after 1940 that women really started to hold a lot of county and statewide offices. So it appears that Oklahoma is about 20 years behind the time, and this is possibly the source of that lag. There are fewer women in elected office in Oklahoma than any other state, and it could be because of this 20-year lag that we experienced, because of the slowness we had in giving women the right to hold all statewide offices. All righty. So after the women get the right to vote, we have World War II. After World War II, one of the most important movements that was going around was the Civil Rights Movement. And the Civil Rights Movement it probably started like 1954 with the passage of the Brown versus Board of Education lawsuit. But between 54, 55, the Montgomery bus boycott, more attention was being paid to black people receiving rights, and you can see the signs on here. We march for all. We march for jobs for all. In segregated rules in public schools. We demand voting rights now. Like, these are all the agenda of the Civil Rights Movement. There were several pieces of legislation that were important, but the most important one in terms of black civil rights was the Civil Rights Act of 1965, or excuse me, it was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Okay, Voting Rights Act of 1965, and it addressed some of the problems that the South had with Jim Crow. Jim Crow is a nickname for the system of laws that kept blacks and whites segregated in the South, including but not limited to the voting laws. So, like on the books, it says, oh yeah, sure, blacks and whites can all vote together, but in practice, while there were a lot of local laws that kept people separate, there's a lot of social intimidation that kept blacks from voting. So, effectively, and I'm not exaggerating, there was very little political participation by blacks in the South from 1876 until 1965. And you'll remember that the 15th Amendment said black men had the right to vote in federal elections. Yet between 1876 and 1965, basically, that right did not exist. So there's about 100 years there where the right to vote was not respected or protected. So the Voting Rights Act basically just said, look, you're going to let black people vote, and that's it. So it enhanced and protected that right that had been established in the 15th Amendment. Okay, civil rights later. All right, the Vietnam War brought about a lot of political activity, including this international student revolution. In 1971, the U.S. Constitution was amended to reduce the voting age from 21 to 18. Why did they do this? Because there were men who were being drafted to go to Vietnam, and they filed suit and they said, we don't want to go, we don't support this war, and we can't even vote for this war, we can't even vote the people out who are creating this war, and so we're not going. The government worked on it and pretty much lowered that voting age to 18 so that young men could both get drafted and vote. And it was pretty interesting because people were very worried about what kind of ruckus that young people would cause, because there's all kinds of crazy political activity going on. This is a typical kind of college rally. The troops are actually called out. And, you know, this hadn't really happened in America until much more recently, like with the Occupy movement. We've seen military-style force used by both the military and the police at putting down these student rallies. But when this happened in the late 60s and early 70s, like, people were freaking out, like this was crazy. And there was even an incident at Kent State University where several protesters were actually shot to death, a college student to death on their campuses. So people were pretty worried about what kind of ruckus they would cause when they were allowed to vote. In my opinion, though, their hesitations were not founded, because if you look at the kind of political activity most young people engage in today, it's very run-of-the-mill, it's very common. It's voter registration drives, it's working for candidates. Until the Occupy movement came up like last summer, I hadn't seen any kind of political violence going on. So it's really been an interesting movement. Okay, so in that last section, you saw an expansion of the suffrage from people without property, black slaves, women, protecting the rights of blacks, and then students. So you can see that we as a society have socially constructed the rules about who can vote. Here's another major issue about who can vote, whether or not we allow felons to vote. And if you think about felons in the United States, you might think of people like this. Only the older of us will remember Tonya Harding, the ice skater who whacked Nancy Kerrigan, or hired her boyfriend to whack Kerrigan in the knee so she could be victorious at her ice skating match. Or maybe this felon, Martha Stewart. They're both felons, and you know what? Neither one of them can vote. Okay, so in America, in the states, like I said, the states can decide what to do with felons. In some states, and this is on a continuum, so some states, they can vote always. They don't even lose the right to vote. In fact, they vote in prison. They actually take the voting machines into the prison and let people vote in there. On the other end of the spectrum, you have states where the vote is lost forever. Forever. Where does Oklahoma fall on this? Well, you might be kind of surprised to find that Oklahoma is actually kind of liberal on the account of felons voting. This is a voter registration card. If you're not registered to vote, feel free to come by my office anytime or download one off of the State of Oklahoma website. If you look at this and you look at, it says right here on the front, Section 10, felons not eligible. Okay, so a felon might be going, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to vote in Oklahoma. But if you keep reading, it says, a convicted felon may not register for a period equal to the time of the original sentence. So, okay, let's say you got sentenced to 1 year, and you're a felon and you went to prison and you were there for 1 year. After you get out, if you wait 1 year, your voting rights are automatically restored in the state of Oklahoma. You don't have to tell anyone, check in with anyone, or tell anybody anything. You can just use this form and register. Now, I'm telling you, people don't know this. There are tons of people who have felonies who don't register to vote, even though they are eligible. So Oklahoma is more on the liberal end of letting people with felonies. One thing I want to mention about felons voting, it's more likely that black men are going to get felonies than about any other kind of person in America. So the fact that felons can't vote really means that many black men, and I'm not trying to stereotype, this is actually a fact, that in the state of Florida, for example, 1/3 of the black men can't vote because they're felons. So the fact that we have these rules, I mean, this is another example of the social construction. Does it say in the Constitution whether felons should be able to vote or not? No, it's something that each state decides. And there are really arguments on either side why felons should be excluded from our political system, why they should be included. And that's going to be part of your homework, is to tell me what you think about felons voting. Okay. And let me just give you this factoid here. For the most part in America, expansion of the suffrage is not an egalitarian inclusion of minority groups, but an attempt by the existing political parties to increase their support. Okay, let me give you an example. Women want the right to vote in the 1910s, before they earned the right to vote. Like, they don't have the right to vote. Do they have a lot of political power? No, they don't. So it's up to the parties in power to decide if they should get that right. And when Republicans in power decided that women should get the right to vote, they didn't do it because they felt, using a big word, egalitarian, or they felt like they wanted to expand equality to all people. They did it because they wanted to get an electoral advantage. They wanted to get more votes. So people, the right to vote is not, I mean, we say, oh, we want everyone to be equal and all that, but for the most part, when it's decided that a group will get more the right to vote, it's not because you want to treat the group well, it's because you're hoping you will stay in power. I just want you to think about that idea. Okay, so we're kind of turning the corner in this lecture a little bit, and we're going to try to answer the question, why do people vote, or why don't people vote? And if we were in class right now, I'd say, okay, why do people say that they don't vote? And people give all kinds of answers for why they don't vote. Why they're too busy, they're not registered, they don't know, they don't care. I just want to point out that voter turnout this is presidential elections. This is the highest level of participation we would expect voting for president. And you can see that, like, here's 50% of the country. That's pretty lame. That only, like 96, only certain 50% of the country would go out and bother to vote here. But in 2008, we saw a huge upsurge. People were very interested in 2008. And so one thing we could say is, if the election is close, if people like the candidates, it seems like there would be more turnout. In 2008, it was it was really a pivotal election. Are we going to have another term of a Republican president? We'd already had George W. Bush for 8 years, or are we going to throw it all away and go in a new direction with Obama and elect? And no matter what you think of him, it's historic to elect a black as the president of the United States. So all those things together combined to create a very interesting election, and I think that's why we had more turnout. Look at 96. I mean, talk about boring. I'm sure that most of you don't remember what's going on there, probably because you were like 4 when this happened. But that was when President Clinton was running for a second term. Everyone knew he was going to win, so, like, who cares? People didn't pay attention. So there are things about the election that can get more people interested. But if you ask folks why they don't vote, they say things like too busy. In fact, too busy is the number one reason people give. They don't care. They're not registered. It doesn't matter. Candidates are crooked. Things are good the way they are. I don't have a babysitter, or I just don't know anything about politics. These are the common kind of answers that people give. So I want to give you a way to sort these out to understand what people are saying when they say these. And in your homework, I'm going to ask you, which of these 3 models do you think is the most persuasive? So get ready to think about which persuades you the most about why people don't vote. Okay, so the first one is called the attitudinal model. And that a model just is an explanation. It's a theory of why people do what they do. So in the attitudinal model, basically what we're saying is it's the voters' attitude to determine whether or not they participate. So some of these attitudes include, and there are many, trust in politicians. Like, if you trust the government, you'll want to vote more. If you think it's not trustworthy, you're not going to want to waste your time on it. Efficacy. Efficacy is a fancy word for you think you can make an effect. have high efficacy, that means you think that your vote matters. What you do will make a difference. And if you feel that way, you're more likely to vote than if you don't feel that way. Political party identification. Let's say you're a huge Democrat, you're a huge Republican. If you have that strong feeling, you're more likely to go vote regardless of who the candidates are than if you're not, if you don't care at all about the parties. So if you're a strong partisan, even if you're a strong libertarian, there hasn't been much research on that. But I know that if you're a strong Democrat or Republican, you're going to end up voting in a greater frequency than people who don't identify with a party. And that's interesting, actually, because about a third of people don't identify with any party anymore, and I don't know how you reach those people. If you're interested in politics, you're going to vote more. If you're knowledgeable about politics, you're going to vote more. I mean, if you don't know, why would you go? It doesn't make sense. Like in the Ada paper, they always have these like calling questions like, do you think the city manager was treated well? 50% said yes, 40% said no, and 10% said they had no response. Like, why would you call the paper and tell them that you didn't know? I mean, it seems like, why would you bother? People are surprising. Okay. In the book, there's a whole section on political socialization. And socialization, I will even tell you the page number here. Let me look. It starts on page 162. Socialization is a fancy word to describe learning. Like, how do you learn? Learning about politics. So political socialization is the process by which we learn about politics. And it's the process by which we learn our beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. So, for example, if you're a little kid and your parents take you to vote all the time, you're going to learn that the behavior of going to vote and making time for it, that's an important thing, and maybe you're going to be more likely to do it than if your parents hadn't taken you. Your beliefs, like are Democrats good or bad, or Republicans good or bad? That's affected by what people around you are saying. And then your attitudes, like efficacy, for example. Do you think you can make an effect? So the way we learn about politics will affect how we participate in the process. So basically, if no one's ever talked to you about voting, like, how are you supposed to learn that that's important? And if you answer, well, school, well, then you're getting socialized not by your family, but you're getting socialized by your school. I think this picture's a hoot. This is a picture, and it was taken in 1948, and it's women who all got together to make a gigantic American flag out of chrysanthemums. Now, why do I think this is amusing? Because for a lot of women, this is what political participation is appropriate. Not running for office, but making a big decoration. And to them, that's the most patriotic thing you could do. That explains to me why in 1920 women didn't run out and vote in huge numbers when they finally got the right to vote. No one had ever told them it's appropriate. Contrast that idea with what happened in Afghanistan when women got the right to vote for the first time after the global war on terror. One of the things America helped make possible was elections in Iraq and Afghanistan. And for the first time in history of the world, women in Afghanistan were allowed to vote, and they stood in line for like 12 hours at a time to exercise this right. Now in America, you'd think American women would run out to go vote, but it was actually the women in Afghanistan who seemed to be more into it than the women in Oklahoma. Another thing that socializes people about politics is the presence of scandal. And I hate scandal in politics because it makes people feel like the political process is not worthy. If they just see crooked politicians all the time, well, why would you want to participate in that? Why would you want to go vote? And we've had some really super scandalous, terrible people in the state of Oklahoma. You might be old enough to remember when all of the county commissioners practically in the entire state, like 250 county commissioners, were all found to be taking bribes. The Oklahoma Supreme Court was found to be taking bribes in the 1960s. this fine fellow, you got to learn about Donald Thompson. I don't even think I can say what he did on this tape because you'll play it for your families and I'll get in a bunch of trouble. But he was a judge in Sapulpa, and when he was hearing criminal trials as a judge, he was playing with a sex toy behind the bench. And it was terrible and disgusting. But how would you like to be on trial and have your judge being otherwise entertained? I mean, it's just awful, the kinds of things we've seen in Oklahoma. We've seen, this is an insurance commissioner named Carol Fisher who took a bunch of bribes. This was like in maybe 2002. Mike O'Neill, just some sexual harassment on his part. But like, if you name it, it's happened in Oklahoma, including, this is one of my favorite, there's a little town called Stigler, and in Stigler, here it is over here. Let me see if I can circle it here. The sheriff was trading absentee ballots for drugs. Like the sheriff was giving people drugs so that they would vote for him so he could be sheriff. And then he goes to jail, and then he gets out, and then they reelect him. Isn't that wild? Anyway, so finally, the attitudinal model says that it's our attitudes that determine whether or not we participate in politics. Scandal erodes the trust that we have in government. It's amazing that any Oklahomans go vote, considering the amount of scandal that we've seen in our state. All right, so the second model is called the institutional model, and it's different. It says it's the institutions of elections that affect turnout and participation. So it doesn't have anything to do with how people feel. It's the laws and the institutions surrounding voting. So here are some examples. Let me start with voting times and days. This is a great example. Okay. We vote in Oklahoma on a Tuesday from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. Okay. You can vote absentee if you're not free during this Tuesday, but other states have other ways to vote. They vote on Saturdays sometimes. They have mail-in ballots. For example, the state of Oregon has gone completely to mail-in ballots, no in-person balloting. Other countries have a voting holiday where no one works except for emergency responders on voting day, or they have a week of voting. The fact that America, we vote, like for president, for example, on a Tuesday, you know you are excluding people from this, yet we don't care. This is what we're doing. We're voting on this one day during these restrictive hours. And if you're, let's say you're a firefighter or a nurse, you might be working the entire time. And yes, your boss is required by law to let you off, but a lot of bosses don't really care what the law says if they're shorthanded. So the voting time and day, because it's difficult, restricts the amount of people that actually can vote, according to the institutional model. Here's another one, the voter registration. Now, this is sort of a state-by-state thing. In Oklahoma, you have to be registered for 30 days before the election. So the problem with that is a lot of times the election doesn't really get interesting until 30 days before the election, and right when people are starting to get interesting is when they might want to go get registered, and they can't. So you're locking out people. You don't want the candidates, parties don't want a surge of people rushing in and registering because it makes it more difficult for them to campaign. So they create this rule that says you have to get registered 30 days before the election. In other states, there's no registration at all. You can just walk up and register. And yes, they'll hold your ballot, make sure you're legit, but once you're cleared, they'll count that ballot. So it's like they have same-day registration. Now, I don't really think they need to have any kind of voter registration. Like, they know everything about us. They know our taxes, they know our Social Security, they know everything. Why do we have to have a separate system of registering? So to me, that's just one of those institutions that's set up that benefit certain people. Okay, if anyone has ever said to you that they don't vote because the Electoral College decides the president anyway, well, that's true, and it's a great example of the institutional model. So the Electoral College is super crazy and complicated. But basically, with the Electoral College, when people vote, let's say Oklahoma, we're going to vote in the election. When we vote, the state of Oklahoma will have 7 electors. Whoever wins the majority of the votes in the state of Oklahoma will win all 7 electors. So let's say, let's just use the last presidential election as an example. So McCain won 65% of the vote, and Obama won 35% of the vote. So who wins the Electoral College delegates? McCain wins them. McCain wins all 7. So, and it's all of our votes put together, which reduces the power of each one of us. Okay, so whenever anyone says to you they're not going to vote because the Electoral College will decide anyway, just say, okay, righto, I get it. However, that argument only works for the president. No other candidate is elected that way. And so it doesn't explain the city council elections, for example. Okay, and then finally, the last example here. Many people say they don't want to bother to vote because they don't care about the candidates. Well, if you think about Democrats and Republicans, a lot of people look at them and they go, okay, Dems and R's, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, they're the same. They're not representing my interest. What I really want to see is another kind of candidate, like a Tea Party candidate, or even a Libertarian, or even a Green Party. They want to see third parties that are not Democrats and Republicans, and they say if they could just have that option, they would go vote. Well, it depends on the state, but in Oklahoma, it is extraordinarily difficult for a party, a third party, meaning a party other than Democrats and Republicans, to get on the ballot. Therefore, the choices that we all can choose from in our buffet, our selection of candidates, is extremely limited. In Oklahoma, we're basically only going to ever get the Democrats or Republicans. It was very, very, very difficult to get on the ballot. Why is it that way? Because Democrats and Republicans create the rules about the ballots. They don't want more because they don't want to have any other choices that are not them. So that's never going to change. Okay, so those are some examples for institutional model. This is an example of how the Oklahoma ballots work, where basically if you go to vote, all you have to do is complete the arrow. Bloop. Very simple, very easy. In other places, like ballots are designed by each county, and they're different county to county. Now, this is starting to get to be ancient history, but back in the 2000 election, the presidential election between Al Gore and George W. Bush, this is the famous butterfly ballot that caused so much trouble in Florida. And if you look at it, let's say you want to vote for Republican, you'd think, okay, it's this first hole here. I put my little stylus through the hole. And then a lot of people got mixed up. And when they wanted to vote for Al Gore, they put their stylus in the second hole here, and you can see that they actually voted for Pat Buchanan. So because the ballots were confusing and they malfunctioned, a lot of people ended up accidentally voting for Pat Buchanan, who they didn't want to vote for. So how would you feel if you went to vote and you realized you voted against your dude, you voted for the enemy? It makes people upset. And then for a while, the trend was going to be moving toward electronic touchscreen balloting. And I think for a lot of us, that wouldn't have caused a problem. But if you consider the person most likely to vote is an elderly person, this is not in their comfort zone. So the potential problems with the video touchscreen voting, and this is actually something Oklahoma never went to, is it could be hacked. Who would know? I don't know. Don't ask me how to figure it out. They could crash, computer scary to the elderly, and lack of transparencies. With the system that Oklahoma has, there could be a power failure and you could still vote. You could still count the votes. You could drop all the votes on the floor, pick them all back up, and recount them. But when you're talking about computer touchscreen and there's a malfunction and it says 1 million votes got cast, well, I don't know what you do. Don't ask me. Okay, so the third model to explain why people participate or not in politics is called the resource model. And it basically says if you have resources, you participate, and if you don't have resources, then you don't. And how did they come up with this model? This particular model was authored by some researchers at Harvard in 1995, and they surveyed 15,000 people, and then they followed up with in-person interviews to help get to the bottom of why they participated in politics. So this is the resource model, and what the researchers here found was that there were 3 critical things: free time, money, and civic skills. And if you had more of these, you participated, and if you had fewer of them, you didn't. It was as easy as that. So let's talk about these resources. First is free time. So let me give you an example. Women tend to do 17 hours of housework a week more than men do. Okay, and that's not everybody, that's just on average. Women tend to do 17 hours more per week of housework than men do. So let's say the woman is tasked with taking care of the kids and making delicious meals like this one. She's just not going to have as much time to meetings, to vote, to read the newspaper, and to do the things that citizenship requires. So it's actually true that and students is another example of the kind of person that you wouldn't expect to vote very much because of the lack of free time. Let's see, I don't remember what's on this slide. Okay, so let me just say, as we're looking at this picture of people standing in line, that the people in America who are least likely to vote are women with children under 2. Women with children under 2 are the least likely of anyone in America to vote. And if you look at this line, I mean, this was taken in during the 2000 election, there were people who showed up to vote, and the line literally was an 8-hour-long line. And I don't know about you all, but I don't have time to stand around for 8 hours on a random day. One time I went to vote, I lived real near to the junior high here in Ada, and I put in my microwave popcorn, and I ran down the street, I voted, I came back, and my popcorn was just getting done. Like, that's how much time I think we want to spend with voting. And I love voting. But if you have to spend 8 hours at the polling place, like, I don't know who would have the flexibility to do that kind of thing. So people without free time are shut out of the process. I don't know how many meetings I've said, oh, yeah, that's great, let's do this. Oh, wait, I have to work, I can't do it. I mean, seriously, that's the kind of thing that gets in the way of people getting involved in politics. Alice Paul was a suffragist, and it's funny, I think about her, she did a hunger strike to urge women to, for women to get the right to vote, and she was in prison for like 40 days, and she was force-fed on her hunger strike, and she had all these health problems, and she worked so hard to get women the right to vote, and now today it's like, who cares, no big deal. If you haven't seen the movie Iron Giant Angels, it's one of the ones you can watch for bonus, and it goes through this whole process. Okay, so the second thing that is a resource we're talking about is socioeconomic status, which is a big fancy way to say money. So if you have money, you are more likely to participate than if you don't. Well, it's not hard to figure out why that might be. If you've got money, you can hire a babysitter. If you've got money, you can hire a nanny or a housekeeper to do the things that are keeping you from being able to participate. So people with more status typically vote. No big surprise. Okay, finally, civic skills. And there are 4 civic skills. Okay, have you written a letter? Like, can you? Can you write? Do you have literacy? Can you make an argument? Do you know how to do it? So writing a letter, giving a speech, gone to a meeting where decisions are made, and planned or chaired a meeting. These are the 4 civic skills that predict whether or not people will get involved in politics. And if you think about where you get these skills, like I'm sure that some of you are in introduction to speech right now and you're thinking about giving speeches, it's not the average American that's assigned to give a speech. Like, it's a kind of an unusual thing to be seen as the kind of leader who would give up and give a speech. And think about this, in Oklahoma, only about 25% of people go to college at all. So, I mean, by being in college, you guys are You're learning the civic skills you will need to be good citizens. You're going to be the elites. And the longer you spend in college, the more civic skills you'll get, and the more likely it will be that you participate in politics. So as you see, school is like the number one determinant of how many resources people have. Then so school is the first place where you get your civic skills. The second place is church. People are on committees, they make decisions, they give speeches. So schools and churches are the number one place where you get your political resources. Okay, let's see. This is a little bit of information about gender gap. Women finally are participating in politics at the same level as men. Like I said, they got the right to vote in 1920 and have been lagging behind in participation. So when women vote, they tend to vote for Democrats. Men prefer Republicans. So when candidates are trying to win, like Democrats really want to try to mobilize women because it seems to help them. This has been a part of several presidents' election campaigns. Oh, and I thought this graph was particularly interesting. This is the 2008 election, and the number one person to vote in America in the 2008 election were black females at 68.8%, obviously mobilized by Obama and the strong Democratic platform. White females were next. White males were at 64.2%, which is almost 5% below the black females. Black males were at 60.7%. Then you have Hispanics, and at the bottom you have Asians, which is really interesting because if people vote based on their economic power, you'd think that Asians would be higher than black, but I think the interest in the election was higher because of Obama. So this is a really interesting finding. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about women. This will explain the actions of several presidential candidates. But in 1992, President Clinton was running, and he thought if he could get those soccer moms to vote for him, then he would win. Now, if you think about the soccer mom, we're talking about a stay-at-home mom. And if you're a stay-at-home mom, that probably means you have a little bit of wealth because, you know, it's a luxury to have mom at home. She's college educated. She probably doesn't have a lot of free time if she's really a soccer mom, but she's going to be of a higher economic status than other people. So, in fact, Clinton won the election because he mobilized those soccer moms. So in the next go-around, Al Gore was like, oh, Clinton's so smart. This is the year 2000. Al Gore was trying to get those waitress moms. So in 2000, he was trying to get the waitress moms to vote for him, and they loved him. But the problem was, think about the resource model. The waitress moms, they don't have the civic skills, they don't have the free time, and they don't have the money. They're waitresses, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying as a political strategy, Al Gore was trying to the wrong folks. So when President Bush was running in 2004, he targeted the security mom. And a lot of his, we were in the midst of the global war on terror, so when he was talking to women about terrorism, he's saying, I'm trying to keep your family safe. And he was really trying to appeal to the security moms. And that's one of the major reasons he won the election, is he got the women to vote for him. So what I'm trying to say here is when presidential candidates get women on their side, they tend to win. So I've said a lot of things. I've made a lot of generalizations about the rules of the game and such. And I just want to ask you this question, can there be change? And this woman, her name is Barbara Jordan. Let me see if I can do this. Barbara Jordan. And Barbara Jordan, member of Congress from Texas in the 70s. And she just defies everything I said. She was not rich property owner. She was really poor. She was not a man. She was a woman. She was not black. She's not white. She's black. She was in a wheelchair, so she wasn't able-bodied. She was a lesbian, and she got elected to Congress, and she was a tremendously strong voice for change. During the Watergate hearings, she was one of the strongest voices against President Nixon, who had lied to the public. So, despite all the generalities I've given you, this is America, and there is room for change, and things will continue to change as long as people continue to vote. Young people are very unlikely to vote. They're very unlikely voters. If you look back to 1996 here in this graph, you can see there's tremendously low turnout, 37%. The highest ever we've ever seen in American history, 52% in 2008. It's very important that young people get out and vote, because the issues that members of Congress and the president are deciding are things that affect you every single day. Your health care, you like Obamacare or not. I mean, you have an opinion. Whether or not the federal government's going to subsidize student loans. If you're not in there telling the government what to do, there's no way you will be listened to. That's why it's so critical that all Americans exercise that right to vote. In the state of Oklahoma, in the last presidential election, 2008, when Obama and McCain were running, you can see 66.9%. I can't wait to see in the year 2012 if this total will go up or not. So the last thing I just want to say is defy the odds. And you need to be one of those people who get out there and really make a difference. I'm sorry this is so long. I just care about it so very much.